Welcome to the Finding Grace in the Wilderness podcast. I'm your host, Sharon Hawkins. Here each week, we will share stories about how God's grace can be found during life's most difficult circumstances. Meet with me around the table as we chat about God's never-ending faithfulness. We will share truth and life and discuss faith, fears, struggles, and victories. Join us as we seek to grow deeper in relationship with Jesus, the one who makes a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. Hi, and welcome to our podcast today. This is the long-awaited interview with my husband, Scott. Welcome to our podcast, Scott.
Well, thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here, honey. I'm really nervous. You make me nervous. You still make my heart go pitter-pat when you get close to me.
I'm sorry.
Don't be. It's a good thing. 5-year-old Susie told her mother the story of Snow White, which she had heard in school. Prince Charming had kissed her back to life. Susie concluded, "And do you know what happened next?" "Yes," said her mother. "They lived happily ever after." "No," responded Susie with a frown. "They got married." I have lovingly named today's show Happily Even After. My guy Scott and I have been through a lot of stuff. Honey, do you want to start by sharing a little bit about our courtship?
Sure. We met at a place called Pumpkin Town Mountain Store in Pumpkin Town, South Carolina. That's where they have the International Pumpkin Festival. I'm sure everybody knows about Pumpkin Town. But anyway, we met there. I was actually learning how to play a banjo, and there was a bunch of musicians, played a bunch of different instruments, would come up there every Friday night, just meet up and play music and eat there. And so Sharon was coming up with her dad. I had my eyes on her, so I went over one night and I asked her out. And so we started dating, and we pretty much spent just about every day together in the evenings. I was in school full-time. I was working full-time, and I would go to school in the mornings and work in the evenings, and after that I would go see her, which was about, 35, 40 minutes from my home. We actually ended up later on buying a home together, and Sharon moved in there and lived there for quite a few months while I was still living at home with my parents. When we were engaged on the 16th of December in 1990, and we got married on May 25th of 1991.
Wow, you get some big points for those dates, honey. It's hard to believe we've been married 33 years now, this past May. I fell deeply in love with you, honey. I will never forget our wedding day when I just couldn't quit smiling all the way through the service. And I've got the good old VHS tape to prove it. Let's look back on some of the expectations that we had before we got married. Of course, we always imagined that we're going to have 2 great careers, a wonderful house, raise 2.0 children, and have our family in church, and that life is just going to be wonderful, and we're going to have that happily ever after. As little girls, we play with our baby dolls from the time that we're old enough to carry them around, dreaming of this dream. Life is filled with the unexpected, both good and bad. Honey, do you want to share about our job situations during that first period of our marriage?
Yeah, right. In 1996, you were planning on starting your own business. It was November 1st, and I go into my job that morning, and they call me up to the HR office. Everything had been going great. September, they'd give me a 10% raise, telling me how wonderful I was doing. And I walk in November 1st, and they bring me into HR and say, "Well, today's your last day here." And I'm like, "Well, what have I done?" They said, "It's nothing you've done." They pretty much told me blood was thicker than water. In other words, they didn't have money to make payroll, so I was the lowest man in supervision. And so they let me go, and we had a 3-year-old at the time. Taylor was 3, and I called you on the phone, and you were going to turn in your notice that following Monday, and this was on Friday. And I asked you, "Are you sitting down, honey?" She says, "Why? What's the problem?" And I said, "They just let me go." So needless to say, we had a 3-year-old child. Sharon was getting ready to start her own business to turn her notice in, and they let me go, so we really had to go on the rice and beans diet for the next few months before she didn't get to turn her notice in, but she got to start her business anyway right here in her upstairs in one of our bedrooms here. But God blessed us through that time, and we made it. We had to change ways and all, but I went and did about 6 months worth of contract work.
After things settled down on the job front, we began trying to have another child, and after 4 years, we moved toward international adoption. We adopted Bradley in October of 2001, right after 9/11. Things weren't exactly like we expected with Bradley, and this impacted our home and our marriage greatly.
Yeah, because he wasn't held and loved in the orphanage. He didn't know how to receive love, didn't know how to give love. And God had to get us through all this. We had to learn a complete new style of parenting to get us through his childhood years. With this new style of parenting, we had to make sure that we were on the same wavelength all the time. Sharon and I had to both be united. We could hardly ever make decisions on our own. We had to make them together because there was a lot of manipulation. He would try to manipulate me. He would try to manipulate Sharon. So we had to be as one on every decision we made while we were raising Bradley.
As the mother of this little guy, it was my instinct to always defend him. And there would be cases like where he might hit Taylor, and I would walk in with Taylor putting him in the floor, and Taylor was 6 years older. And then I would fuss at Taylor, and Scott would walk in and say, "Sharon, you know it was Bradley." And then Scott and I would be in an argument, and our little 3-year-old would hop up, smiling and laughing, and go into the other room. And it left our family in chaos, and we were so unequipped to parent him. Through all this, what got us through was clinging to God and clinging to each other. 2010 was when my best friend embezzled money from our company, and it was scary because at first I didn't see how our business could survive it. And I felt that our family's financial future was in jeopardy. We prayed together. Scott supported me with all the hours that I had to work. He kept the home fires burning while taking care of the children. God carried us through.
Yeah, God showed us a lot of grace and mercy and power of his faithfulness through this whole situation. It was a very trying time. Sharon had a lot of really late nights she had to work, and so it was quite the adventure for us. Our next big obstacle was when Sharon called me in 2011, and when she found out she had breast cancer. I'll never forget, I was working at the career center, which was no longer being used as a career center in the school district. We were cleaning some stuff out, and she called me and told me she had just found out she had breast cancer. So I went out, just went outside, and there was a bench out there, and I just went there and I sat there and cried like a baby. I was scared. I didn't know what to expect next. I just know that I wanted to be there for her, and I just asked God if he would just lead us and to protect Sharon through this whole journey.
Nothing prepares you for that C word, cancer. My breast surgeries and reconstruction didn't go quite as planned, and I had a lot of pain and a lot of struggles with it, a lot of sleepless nights, and my husband slept on the couch to be near me while I was in my recliner for months at a time. I will never forget having a talk with him about that and telling him that my breasts were my best asset, and he said, "No, honey, your heart is." This was a very difficult time for me. Scott's love and compassion during this time meant everything to me. And I started a new practice. I went to my husband one night when I was really broken. I had him put his arms around me and hold me tightly. And I said, "Repeat after me. Don't worry about a thing. I'm going to take care of everything." I knew he couldn't take care of everything, but still it gave me great comfort to feel his arms around me. And I knew from the depths of my soul that he wanted to fix everything. God was there for us, and we clung to him through some very difficult times, through struggles with Bradley, through my mom's cancer journey and her death, through the employee theft and my cancer around that time and reconstruction and all those difficult times. My husband didn't run. He stayed right there. Through my breast cancer journey, I think Scott and I learned to appreciate more and not take for granted that we have each other. We learn more about how fragile life is. I leaned on Scott again when my dad passed in January of 2016 from Parkinson's. With both my parents gone, I then came to realize I was considered an orphan, but I still had Scott. And that's when I went to him repeatedly and asked him to say that thing he always said. And he'd take me in his arms and tell me he was going to take care of everything. Then came November 10, 2021, the day that rocked our world like no other.
Yeah, and Sharon calls me that day, and I'm here cutting grass, and she calls me and says Bradley's had a skateboard accident, hit his head. I thought, okay. She said they're on their way carrying him to the hospital, so I just thought, well, he's probably going to have some stitches or whatever. And I leave here, and I'm headed toward the hospital in Greenville, and she calls me and she says, no, they've taken him to Easley. So I turn back and go toward Easley, and I get about a mile from the hospital, and thoughts through my mind are, Lord, part of Grace in the Wilderness, she's had this Moms Who's Lost Children ministry, and I'm thinking, Lord, please tell me this is not what you've been preparing her for, because I think at the time there was 300 or 350 women, and Sharon was heavily involved helping to minister to these ladies, and she was the only mom that was a part of that had not lost a child. So that thought crossed my mind when I got about a mile from the hospital, but little did I know when I got there that we was going to get the worst news a parent could ever get, and that was when I arrived, found out that Bradley had passed from his accident. And this was a time when you walk into a situation like this, so unexpected. Your heart breaks, you go numb, and the only thing to turn to at that time is God. And Sharon and I both had to be there to support each other. This is something that no parent should ever have to go through, and no one can understand what it's like until you've been through it. And it's just, you have to totally depend on God to get you through these situations.
The grief process is different for men and women. I had my wonderful Grace Girls, Moms Who've Lost Children group, but I really wanted Scott to have support. I was desperate to find him other men that could understand and help bring encouragement to him. Bless his heart, he had a drug problem for a while. He got drug everywhere. To every couple's grief program that I could find. It was such a painful thing, and still is. But when you hurt like that, you're so desperate to find any peace. I found a parents' grief retreat in Lake Tahoe, Nevada, and I asked Scott if he wanted to go on a vacation. We had missed our Alaskan cruise for our 30th anniversary. So we decided to make a pilgrimage to the other side of the country. In June of 2022, we went to Phoenix, Arizona, and traveled through the Grand Canyon, Las Vegas, Mammoth Lakes, Hoover Dam, Death Valley, Yosemite National Park, and into Lake Tahoe, Nevada, on up into Lake Tahoe, California, and we flew home from Reno. We visited the grief retreat in Lake Tahoe, and it was a wonderful experience with While We Are Waiting Ministries. There were many other parents there who understood, who shared their stories with us. We were in search of comfort and guidance from God on our next steps because we were so lost without our Bradley. There is nothing like the majesty of God's creation to bring you comfort when you're going through difficult times. When you see all that God can do, it gives you peace to know that He can take care of you no matter where you are, no matter what you're going through. We found God in His cathedral out in nature on that trip. It's still a struggle every day, and we grieve differently. We try to be there for each other. Grief, on some level, is truly between you and God. It's hard to explain unless you've experienced it. All we know is without that triple braided cord, our marriage would have come undone a long time ago through these stresses. When life's pulled on our cords, God's been the strand that's held us together. I'm going to turn to a more positive note now, honey, and I want to ask you if you would share some of the blessings that we've received and how they've brought us together.
Well, we started out in 3 years ago on June the 8th. We had a little grandbaby, and he was born, and he was 5 months old when Bradley passed, but Bradley got to spend some time with him, and nothing can ever take the place of your child, but these grandchildren have brought us so much joy. We have a little granddaughter now who is 10 months old, and they've been such a blessing. Will always be a hole in our heart, but these grandbabies help take away some of the pain anyway and fulfill some of that hole in your heart.
I've learned through this journey that joy and grief can exist together because they're both rooted in love. It's been so much fun watching Scott being a papa and acting a fool. Not that I don't.
Yes, I'll do anything to get a laugh out of them grandbabies.
We went on a trip recently with Taylor, our son, and his wife Reed, our daughter, and the babies, Levi and Hadley. And I had the pleasure of dancing in the fountain in downtown Charleston with my little Levi. We were both soaking wet. One of the things that I learned from Bradley after he was gone was that having fun is not the worst thing. He taught me to love life bigger and laugh harder. And that is one of the great blessings. In the good times and in the hard times, God is always faithful. He loved our boy so much, and there was a spiritual battle that continued through his whole life. But praise God, now he's in heaven. As difficult as it was at times, I am so thankful to have had the opportunity to have this wild ride with our boy, and we're going to see him again. There have been many blessings in our marriage. Marriage is filled with highs and lows. Through it all, it is part of God's divine plan for the family. Genesis 2:24 says, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." When one hurts, you both hurt. And when there's joy, it's doubled. Marriage is a precious gift, and it needs to be continually nurtured and allowed to grow. Scott, do you have any thoughts to share on that?
Yeah, when you take those vows to become one, that is not just a saying is become one. You literally do become one. What affects one affects the other. I think in a relationship, trust is a huge thing. You've got to not break that trust. That's one thing Sharon and I have. We have a lot of trust for each other. We don't worry about one doing something behind the other's back. In raising children, I think you need to be together, united. As far as when you raise your kids, you need to work together on those relationships with the kids. And I've always said that the parents should be at the top of the food chain in the family. You always take care of your kids' needs. You don't be their best friend and get them everything they want. Sharon and I both were raised where we had a lot of wants, but we did not get what we wanted always. But anytime there was a need, our parents went always out of their way to meet that need. You always put your marriage at the top because it comes before your children.
I think it's important that we get to be our best as an individual, to be our best as a couple. We have to give each other room to follow our own interest and not smother each other. I've appreciated that so much with Scott. Without his support and his help, I could never have done ministry work for 16 years, nor could I have had my business. My ministry is my creative outlet. It's what I love. And his creative outlet has been playing in a band for 33 years?
Since 1992, yeah.
Wow. I think it's wonderful when you work hard to be best friends. You look for interests that you have in common. Scott and I both love to go thrifting. We like to travel, although we haven't gotten to do a ton of travel. He is going to retire in the next year, and we hope to do more traveling then. We love to see the country. We love to go to places we've never been.
Communication's a really big deal in a marriage also. I mean, you've got to let your spouse know how you feel. They need to let you know how they feel about certain situations. You need to know what their need is, or let them know what your need is from the relationship.
If issues aren't dealt with, they tend to pile up and make it more difficult to resolve. The devil likes nothing more than to get between a husband and wife. When things aren't known, Satan has a great way of filling in the gaps with things that aren't true. The best way to combat this is with open and total honesty, even at the risk of causing an argument. To me, this is one of the hardest parts of marriage. It's keeping the slate wiped clean. There's a joke that says, "Don't go to bed mad, stay up and fight." Many marriages function this way, but in the end, the marriage is not nurtured, and love tends to wither and not grow. 1 Corinthians 13:4-7 says, "Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It is not rude, it is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres." God is love, and He helps us with our marriages. And only with Him as the center of our marriages can we have this level of commitment to our mate.
Romance is also a very important part of a marriage, and it's not always about the cards and the letters. It may just be a call to ask, "How are you doing today?" It may be a late night trip to the Waffle House to sit across from each other and talk to each other, or going to a movie. Sharon and I, we spend a lot of time together, especially on the weekends, out thrifting and going out to eat and just spending time here at our home together too. So it's not all about bringing home roses or spending a lot of money.
Laughter is one of the most important parts of a marriage and getting through, especially when you have hard times. Sometimes you have to laugh to keep from crying.
And I give you plenty to laugh about, that's for sure.
Yes, you do. You wouldn't believe how much we've laughed making this podcast and having to re-record. We've had dogs barking and some other things that maybe I shouldn't mention. Speaking of laughter, a few years ago, I wrote a funny article called Mrs. Big Mouth. I want to share it with you. Do you ever do it? Wish that the second a word leaves your lips that you could get it back? Once spoken, though, it's just too late. So you brace yourself for the reaction to your thoughtlessness, feeling that you deserve whatever you get. Well, I admit it. I have done it. Yep, that's me, Mrs. Big Mouth. And although I'm married to Mr. Wonderful, sometimes I hate to admit it, but in a second of anger, I have flung a jab or backhanded comment in his direction. Understandably, he doesn't like it even a little bit. Romans 7:15 says, "I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do." It is kind of ironic that the strongest muscles in the human body are those that close the jaw. Yet mine are not nearly strong enough sometimes to keep my mouth from flapping wide open like a barn door in a windstorm. The tongue shall bring death or life. Those who love to talk will reap the consequences, according to Proverbs 18:21. We can speak death in our marriages, and we have to be careful about that. Women have a lot of power where our husbands are concerned. God gifted us with a lot of influence. Are we using it for good? Bringing criticism, judgment, and self-righteousness into our marriages definitely will speak the language of death to our marriages. Hurtful words bring our husbands down when we should be lifting them up. Most women want a hero and a protector for a husband, and our husbands want to be that hero. But let's face it, they cannot feel very protective or heroic when we're telling them how disappointed we are in them. The Bible has much to say on this matter, so it must have great importance to the Lord. Proverbs 14:1 says that the wise woman builds her house, but with her own hands the foolish one tears hers down. That verse has so much truth. Here's another one. Proverbs 21:9 says, "Better to live on a corner of a roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife. It can get pretty uncomfortable on a roof, blazing hot in the summer and blustery cold in the winter. Plus, some husbands are afraid of heights. Like my husband. He fell off a ladder 2 weeks before he married me, trying to get out of marrying me. I'm sure of it." Boy, it must really be bad to live with a griping woman if a man would rather live on the corner of a roof. Thankfully, that's not all the Bible has to say on the subject. There is hope. 1 Peter 4:8 says, "Above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins." I'm so glad my husband's love and forgiveness exceed his ego and pride where I'm concerned. So I guess what I'm saying is every man's love language is to be encouraged and appreciated. Marriage is all about give and take. Philippians 2:3-4 says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or empty pride, but in humility consider others more important than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interest, but also to the interest of others." The other day, I heard a preacher say that he wouldn't marry a couple if they insisted on writing their own vows. He said he knew the couples were attracted to each other. The real question is, what are you promising each other? Marriage is a covenant, a holy vow before God, and it's more about grace, not a law that we have to live up to. It's a promise of radical love. The Bible gives us the greatest instructions for marriage. Ephesians 5:21. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. Danny Delgado, author and leader of Uncommon Marriage Ministries, says there is no such thing as falling in love. Love is not something you fall into or fall out of. Love is not a feeling. Love is a decision. Love is a commitment. Love is a choice. In marriage, love is a promise that says, I will be there for you all of my days. I will be there when you lose your job, your health, your parents, your looks, your confidence, your friends. It's a promise that tells your spouse, I'll build you up. I'll overlook your weaknesses. I'll forgive your mistakes. I'll put your needs above my own. I'll stick by you even when the going gets tough. Love says, your life will not go unnoticed because I will notice it. Your life will not go unwitnessed because I will be your witness. And the good news is, this podcast interview is over, and I think we're still married, right, honey?
Absolutely we are.
Thank you for doing this.
You're welcome. I hope it wasn't too painful for those out there to listen to me.
I think they listen to me more because I talked a whole lot more.
That's a good thing.
No, I love you, sweetie.
I love you too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Finding Grace in the Wilderness. Please like and subscribe to support the growth of the ministry and so you don't miss a single episode. Check out SharonHawkins.net for show notes or to contact me about speaking engagements or find out more information about how to support Grace in the Wilderness Ministries. May God lead you safely through your wilderness as you trust Him, and may His river of grace always flood your desert times. He is doing a new thing. Let's not miss it. See you here next week.